Doesn't anyone notice this? I feel like I'm taking crazy pills!
I don't want you to ride. I don't want you to write to your congressman because I wouldn't know what to tell you to write. I don't know what to do about the depression and the inflation and the Russians and the crime in the streets. All I know is that first, you've got to get mad.
Has the whole world gone crazy? Am I the only one around here who gives a shit about the rules?
You have the luxury of not knowing what I know.
I want you to get up now. I want all of you to get up out of your chairs. I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not gonna take this anymore!
So we've been talking to you about the Convention of States. Very, very, very powerful tool that our founders gave us, which was really a in case of emergency break glass. When the federal government, not if, when the federal government gets big enough that it just stops listening to the people and it just stops caring. And no matter what option you choose at the ballot box, they go in with the best intentions, but it's like standing in front of an avalanche. They just get taken over and consumed by it. And the game begins to be normal. And they're told by those who have been there for too long that this is just how it is. And if you want to have any influence and if you want to accomplish anything, you're going to have to play along. And these are the lessons that get handed down from generation to generation for generation. The Convention of States, that is the solution. Washington is plagued with a disease of inefficiency, spending, sovereignty. There's a cure for that disease, and it's Article 5. Article 5 was specifically put there for this reason. Now, I want to get over some of the things that I'm upset about right now as I've been looking deeper and deeper into the Convention of States, and we've been on the phone with the great folks over at conventionofstates.com, and we've been doing our own research, and I've been digging through all the resolutions and reading through them all and going back and forth with the great people over there at conventionofstates.com. And we've been kind of having some conversations and working some things out and really getting granular. And I can tell you, this is the way.
This is the way.
This is the way. This is the way.
This is the way. Now, we've built an entire section of our website dedicated to the Convention of States. Register, get yourself signed up, sign the petition, find out who your congressman is or what legislature in the state legislature is the one to speak to. They have a simple tool where you put in your information and bang, there it is. We have links to that on our website as well. Just go to your state and you'll see a link to find your representative. Hit them up on Facebook, hit them up on Twitter, hit them up on LinkedIn, hit them up on email, call them. If there's comments that could be left on their website, leave them there. Get active. It's about time that conservatives, and not even conservatives, because Kennedy Democrats are in this camp too. They don't like to see any of this crap going. Now, there's three basic tenets of this proposal that the states are being asked to sign on to. One is a balanced budget amendment to try and address the $28 trillion of debt that the nation is in right now and climbing as they continue to sign trillion-dollar packages and, trillions of dollars in a COVID relief bill. A few billion went to actual people. The rest of it went overseas or to some other random pork project. Every bill that gets written has this nonsense on it. As a matter of fact, Rand Paul recently addressed this. So if anybody's curious, if you hear one of your senators or one of your legislators getting upset about the balanced budget bill, and their concern is that their state is going to lose their funding and they get so much funding from the federal government, understand that you have a rhino on board, okay? Because this is a human being, and the longer they've been there, the worse it is. Because that just means that you live in a state that's been terribly mismanaged for decades on end, to the point where it's absolutely dependent on the federal government, and that no severe changes are going to come until it's forced off the tit of the government. And the reality of the matter is that might hurt a little bit at first. But what you'll see is they'll start to make the changes that were long overdue. States should be able to operate independently. That was the whole point of this thing. No money that's in your state budget that is coming from the feds comes without strings. None of it. Not a penny. Every single penny is tied to the feds making you do something, making your state do something, making you conform in some way. The Civic Securist Democracy Act, they have no power over local education. How do you think that they're doing it? They're doing it by denying grant money, by taking the states that have enslaved themselves to the federal grants and federal budget and the federal purse, and they're making them do whatever they want. So how does our federal government spend money? How do they do it? Like, is it going, you hear the real ignorant, right? But we need roads. We need a military. And they go on, list off all the basic crap that none of your money is getting spent on. You want to know where your money's getting spent? Over $1 trillion a year? Here are some examples.
We actually borrow more in a month than we used to borrow in a year. In March of this year, we borrowed $660 billion in 1 month. $28 trillion in debt. Whose fault is it? Republicans, Democrats? The answer is yes. Yes on both fronts. So what we end up with is a $28 trillion debt. If you want to study cocaine and you want to study Japanese quail using cocaine and you want to know if they're more sexually promiscuous, they're being voted on by people who are selected by the people doing the studies. $500,000 spent studying Panamanian frogs. They want to know whether or not the mating call of the country frogs in Panama is different than the mating calls of the city frogs. We've now discovered that the NIH was funding the Wuhan lab. So we should have oversight on what happens. But after 50 years of abuse at the National Science Foundation, we're still studying, will people eat ants to combat climate change? If someone in the buffet line, when you're going through the buffet or Luby's cafeteria, and someone in front of you sneezes on the food, are you more or less likely to eat the food? $2 million. And hearing Neil Armstrong say, one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind, or did he say, one small step for a man? The National Science Foundation got $700,000 of autism money to study one word, the preposition a. And you know what their conclusion was in the end? We just don't know. This is lizards on the treadmill. So we spent, $1.5 million studying lizards on a treadmill. We bring in about $3 trillion in revenue, and we spend about $4 trillion. While we would borrow money from China to send kids in Pakistan to space camp in Alabama or to Dollywood, $250,000. We also spent over $1 million in Afghanistan doing an anti-drug program, $90 million on a hotel in Kabul. The hotel was never built. They need another $250,000 to destroy what's left of the hotel. The list goes on and on and on. The frustration of the American people is, why does it never change?
Why does it never change? Why does it never change? That's what people have thrown their hands up. I've heard people talk to me, and these are conservative-minded people. These are constitutional thinkers, and not like great constitutional thinkers, but lovers of the Constitution. These are people who are beholden to the Constitution, who believe that it's the great document that it is. And they look at convention of states, or even better yet, they look at the federal government in general and just throw up their hands. And they just say, you know what? We've let this get so out of control that there's just no stopping it now. This machine is too big. The monster is too great. The monster is not too great. The states can absolutely begin to impose. That's right, not suggest, not refer, not request, impose things on the federal government. So when we get mad all the time that there's no balanced budget and this, and all the fools are like, well, just keep voting. You could just vote for someone. There's nobody running that doesn't get poisoned once they get in there. Not one. Every single person that gets elected in with all of their wonderful talk and jabber, they get in and they become a part of the machine. Well, that's over now. Convention of States puts an end to that. So the other piece that's wanted is the overreach. So they're trying to focus on government overreach, federal overreach. A lot of it has to do with regulatory agencies, these unelected officials who get to make laws, punishable laws, without anybody voting for anyone, not represented by anyone, just Congress delegating its fundamental duties elsewhere. It's nonsense. You want to keep a regulatory agency or two, fine. I don't have a problem with the EPA continuing on and doing research to help, help keep things clean. Definitely, the EPA had merits before it started attacking American citizens. There was a day when the EPA had a lot to do with the cleanliness of things today. It's just out of freaking control. And the reality of the matter is the fact that it has punishable power is unacceptable. It's unconstitutional, regardless. Guess what, guys? The courts say it's constitutional doesn't mean something's constitutional. Precedent is not law. Congress has a whole separate constitution that they work off of that goes by previous Supreme Court decisions. Shit doesn't work that way. That's not how it works. Just because a previous judge said something doesn't mean that goes on forever. Okay? That goes on as long as another judge decides that's not the case. The Constitution itself does not change. And there is nowhere in the Constitution, there is no power given to the legislature that allows it to delegate its own power to someone else, to an unelected body. There is none. There's nothing. As a matter of fact, any power that's not clearly defined doesn't even belong to them. It belongs to the states. So the overreach is another noble cause, and I'm totally behind that. And lastly, term limits for Congress. How does someone disagree with term limits for congressional members? I just don't see how that, if there's ever been a universal agreement point, it's that. It's that. So these are the things that are out there, right? So what are the arguments against it? Because there are some Republicans who embarrassingly know so little about history that they can't wrap their head around something like this and how it would work. And they're scrambling for more details about how the procedures should go. Because it doesn't even occur to them that the reason there are no details about how the procedures should go is because this is the federal government writing this document. And it's the states who are setting the procedures. So they're not giving them a way to do it. We've run conventions before. We know how this works. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to read a book. There's tons of documentation on how conventions work. Tons. So they think there'll be a runaway convention that the delegates will just start heading in and, oh my God, they'll start overriding the Constitution. They're going to come out like the original Convention of States, and they're just going to come out with this completely different document. No, they're not. In the original Convention of States, they went in there with authority from the states that was pretty wide open, because what they were amending was a pretty big hot mess. The Articles of Confederation were a hot mess. It was a philosophical document that in practice was ridiculous. You had states, everyone using their own currency. So if you live in Georgia, you're using Georgia currency. You live in New York, you're using New York currency. Some may share, it gets funky. The federal government had no ability to tax whatsoever. So we complain about high taxes. Right? No, even conservatives aren't saying no taxes. Nobody's arguing no taxes, no income taxes maybe, but not no revenue to the federal government. Nobody's making that argument because everybody with common sense understands they need to fund the military. There are duties of the central government. Okay, Articles of Confederation did not fund that government. So they were basically panhandling the states for money to keep things going. So that was a mess of a document, and that's why it got totally rewritten. The delegates were sent in there with instructions, which were read out loud to everyone, that expressly saying that their states were giving them authority that was pretty wide open because they knew there were a million issues that had to get tackled with the problems that were in the Articles of Confederation. That is not the case now. We've got 200 plus years of history of a document that has been very carefully amended, and the process is not easy. So it needs to be a big deal to be able to amend the Constitution. It is not an easy process. There needs to be immense consensus for anything to get done. So the idea that, and every single one, by the way, every single one of the resolutions, and yes, I have read all of them, the ones that have been passed already and the ones that are pending on legislation right now. And every single one of them has clear stipulation in it that will tell what the delegate is allowed to speak about and what they're not. And not one of the documents goes beyond those three issues. Some of the documents are actually a little concerning because they specifically said you can't do some. Mississippi came in, they gave the first two, but then the last one for term limits, they expressly said our delegate does not have authority from the state of Mississippi to have any conversation about term limits. North Carolina, from what I saw, is only talking about term limits and leaving out the other two. But most of the ones that are passed already have listed all three. And I can't, it boggles me why you wouldn't pick why you would leave one of those three out. To me, they're common sense. My Democrat friends, not my leftist psycho friends, my Democrat friends are in agreement with those principles as well. So why would you not want your Democratic state in on the Convention of States to have their say instead of having to just sit back and ratify it at the end? How about getting them in there? How about getting them in there to have the conversation? Because it's likely that conversation is going to take place. Okay? So another argument against it that's equally as crazy, and we'll give you an example from North Carolina about just how this comes out to be articulated and what it sounds like when you say it out loud, is why don't we just work with the current documents that we have now? I don't see why we need to amend the Constitution. Why can't we work within the system we have now? Now, let's just think about that for a second. We are working within the system we have now. Article 5 is in the Constitution. We are taking a constitutional approach to this. We are taking a legal approach to this. We are using lawful methods to accomplish our goals. That's exactly how it should be done. But let's hear how it sounds out loud as someone in North Carolina decided to voice his confusion, I guess. And I think the reaction in the room probably cleared it up for him.
It seemed like to me that everything you just talked about is that we've elected a Congress to go up and do. It seems like what we're doing here is substituting the will of that Congress that we elected to do what they're not doing. And I've kind of got a hard time with that. I'm struggling with it. Help me with that. Why can't we get our Congress to do what it's supposed to do?
Is that a rhetorical question?
I mean, like the last words came from his lips, and just instinctively the whole room starts breaking out laughing. I think any normal person who hears that finds the humor in that as well. And I think that representative understood after it left his lips. It was just one of those moments. Sometimes you just do stuff. We all do it. You say something. You're trying to play a devil's advocate on an issue, and you ask a question that's just ridiculous, right? And why can't we get Congress to do what they're supposed to do? Just that's where we are. That's where we are. That when someone asks, why can't we get Congress to do what they're supposed to do, a room full of delegates or a room full of representatives just laugh. So I don't know that there's ever been a time that something like this is more necessary. And I do feel that this is a completely bipartisan thing, even though the votes across the states have been somewhat on partisan lines. So mostly on partisan lines. There are some Democrats jumping on board, and there are some Republicans fighting against it. We should identify the Republicans fighting against it, that's for sure. And we should really identify the Democrats fighting against it as well. The states need to take their power back. If you're not aware of how this country was designed to be set up, I'm not even saying this is an insult. You need to go and you need to educate yourself on it. And there's good places to do that. All right. Convention of States website is an excellent place to do that. You register. I went on and I was kind of, when they were explaining to me, like, there's a course you got to take, I was like, oh, geez, this is work. But you know what? It's just some videos that you watch. And honestly, the videos are very enlightening. They really are enlightening. And they're from historians. It's not like, someone's on there yelling Trump, Trump, Trump. Like they're just giving you basic civics and basic history that unfortunately has been void from classrooms for a very long time. A very long time. But they give you some constitutional education and some insight as to how this country was designed to work and why it worked so well for so many years. And why it'll continue to work well in the future, so long as the states understand that they take their power back. As long as the states can impose power. And honestly, if any one of those three things gets passed, the mere fact that the people understand now and that there's precedent for the Convention of States to be utilized, and that Congress has now been put on notice that we can implement things on them, that they are not in control, that alone. So if you pass term limits, chances are you'll see them pass a balanced budget amendment before we even get around to it. Because one thing they don't want is stuff imposed on them. That's one thing they don't want. Now, unfortunately, if that happens, they're going to pass some watered down version of it. Whereas if we put it in, it's going to stick, and it's going to be very broad, and it's going to make the case with few exception. You know, emergencies, natural disasters, things of that nature, right? We don't want the feds to not be able to help with disaster relief if a state is taking a pounding from a hurricane, or if the nation is at war and we need to respond, you know, things of that nature. But those will be the only reasons to allow for borrowing. Just like your family. When an emergency happens, okay, it's all right to go hit the credit card when you have to. But that's when an emergency happens. It doesn't mean you're spending $2 million on chickens or lizards on treadmills. And the only way to put this check on them, they're not going to do it to themselves. It's got to be us. Get on a website, check out the information. We added an entire section on Convention of States. Plenty of links there for you to get over to conventionofstates.com, which I highly suggest you register for. If you have time on your hands, volunteer, get yourself involved, especially if you're in a state where one of these pending legislations are. We need your voice. It'll only take about 1,000 people. 1,000 real, serious activist people who will take it on, hit them with the messaging, pound them out. If 1,000 people start pounding out one of these representatives on their social media, in their email, and they're calling them, if they start doing that, that's enough to swing an election. You get 2,000 people, now you're talking serious business. Now they're petrified. Now they're telling their peers, dude, they're really coming after me. They're going to vote me out of here. And then change starts to get made. There are a lot of states coming up on the ballot this particular year. A lot of states that are bringing this issue to their House floors, to their Senate floors, looking at these resolutions and trying to move forward with them. If you have representatives that you can reach out to, get on the website, find out who they are. It'll take you to conventionofstates.com. They've got an excellent lookup tool there. Go there, find out who the rep is that you got to reach out to, and get on it. Get on it. Rant over.
And like that,